So there I was, standing in a line of 100 guys, who all thought they were the main character. Every single one of them looked the part way more than I did. Big arms, glowing eyes, auras leaking out of their skin like they literally couldn't contain the power inside them. Real main character energy, every direction I looked. Me? I looked like I had accidentally wandered into the wrong building on my way to buy groceries. Wrong room, wrong energy, wrong everything. My name is Kai, and this right here was the single most important day. Of my 17 years on this planet, the awakening ceremony, the one day, every year when the government sticks a needle in your arm and a machine tells you what you are, what you get, what your future looks like from that moment on. Some people get fire, some get lightning, gravity, manipulation, time perception, enhanced speed so ridiculous they blur when they move, and some people get nothing. I had been dreaming about this day since I was 6 years old, watching the National Awakening broadcast on TV from my dad's lap. I had planned what it would feel like. My older brother got wind manipulation 3 years ago. Shrank potential, clean result. My mother got healing, rare, valuable, immediately useful in every possible way. My father got enhanced strength powerful enough to make him a Class A hunter before he turned 30. And me? I was the last one. The one everyone had been nervously waiting on. The one they were, quietly, politely, very carefully terrified about for years. I could see it in the way they smiled when they talked about my ceremony. A little too steady. It'll be fine, Kai. My mom kept saying every morning that week, but her eyes were doing something completely different from her mouth, and I noticed every single time. The lab smelled like antiseptic and nervous energy. Scientists in white coats moved through. The crowd with tablets, logging data before the needles even came out. At the front stood Dr. Ilara Voss, head of the Evolution Research Division, and the woman who essentially ran the awakening classification system for the entire country. She had this look, the kind that said she'd already calculated your worth, your ceiling, and your entire projected trajectory before you even opened your mouth. I hated her immediately. Not personally. I didn't know her. Yet. Just on principle. Some people have a face that announces its verdict before it speaks. They called us up one by one. The guy in front of me got eagle sight. Enhanced vision, predator reflexes, textbook S-rank, potential. The whole room clapped for him. He looked smug. I considered tripping him on his way back to his seat. I didn't, but I thought about it with real commitment for a solid 3 seconds. Then they called my name. I walked up to that chair like a man heading to the dentist appointment he had been dreading since childhood, sat down, held out my arm. The needle went in, cold and clinical. The machine behind me hummed to life. The crowd got a little quieter, the way crowds do when something interesting might happen. And then, nothing. For 3 full seconds. The display sat completely blank, like it wasn't quite sure what to make of whatever it was finding inside me. I heard a whisper, then another, then that low ripple of murmuring that spreads through a crowd like water, finding a crack. Slow at first, then all at once. Dr. Voss leaned in and tapped the screen, frowned the particular frown of someone whose data isn't matching their model. The machine hummed again, then the result loaded. She read it out in the flat clinical voice of someone announcing a weather forecast, evolutionary mimicry, animal subtype. A pause just long enough to feel like a verdict. Level 1. Dead silence. Then someone laughed. Just one person, somewhere near the back, but one is genuinely all it ever takes, isn't it? One crack and the whole thing opens. Level 1 is basically the system's polite way of saying you exist. Congratulations on being technically alive. That is more or less the entirety of the compliment. A level 1 evolutionary. Mimicry meant I could theoretically transform into animals. In practice, at level 1, most people with this ability could shift maybe a fingernail, a patch of skin, one tooth, if they pushed really hard. It was considered one of the least useful awakenings in the modern classification system, almost a joke. Dr. Voss made a note on her tablet without looking up at me. Then, she said, "Next," and moved on. Just like that, I was an afterthought. Before I had even stood from the chair, I sat in the waiting area and watched the rest of the ceremony like a man watching his house get renovated by someone else. One guy got quantum teleportation. The crowd lost it. I stared at my hands, tried very hard to feel something, anything, a tingle, a shift. The faintest signal that the machine had made. A catastrophic, embarrassing error. Nothing. Not even a flicker. Just my hands, looking exactly as they always had, completely and stubbornly human in every direction. I went home and my family tried very hard not to look disappointed. My dad gripped my shoulder and said, "Power isn't everything in the tone that only powerful people use." My mom made my favorite food and talked about literally anything else for 2 hours. She mentioned the weather 3 separate times. It was not complicated weather. My brother started a sentence with some level 1s figure out tricks. I saw a video once, and I told him I was going to bed. At 6 p.m., I pulled the blanket over my head. I lay there in the dark and just thought about the awakening system, about the fracture. The day 40 years ago when reality cracked and everything changed permanently. Animals started evolving into monsters overnight. Humans started waking up with abilities no one had language for, and the whole world rebuilt itself around those numbers. About how your rank determined your school placement, your career, your social standing, your entire projected future distilled down into one clean, ruthless final number, and mine said, Level 1, Evolutionary Mimicry. A polite way of saying the universe had reviewed my potential and returned it with a shrug and a form letter. I should have gone to sleep. Instead, I did something objectively not smart. I snuck out at midnight and walked to the restricted forest zone outside the city limits. The zone where evolved animals roamed free, where you needed a hunter license just to stand at the entrance gate. Completely illegal. Genuinely dangerous. Did I care at that exact moment? I was having a really catastrophically bad night, so let's just say my risk assessment module was temporarily not functioning. I found a clearing deep enough that I couldn't see the city lights anymore. Sat down in the grass and tried. Focused. Thought about animals. Cats, hawks, wolves. For a full hour, absolutely nothing happened. I sat alone in a forest full of evolved predators, trying to grow fur, feeling like the single most ridiculous person alive. I once tripped in front of my entire school during a fire drill. This was somehow worse. At least the fire drill had an audience to confirm I existed. And then, right at the exact moment I had completely given up, something happened. It started in my fingertips, a warmth, faint at first, then a pressure, something that felt enormous and ancient, like a door swinging open inside my chest that I hadn't known was there. Then my fingers shifted, just for a second, dark, sharp, curved into something that was very definitely not fingers anymore. Claws, real, actual claws. Then they snapped back and I nearly hit the ground. But I was grinning so hard my face actually hurt. Because here's the thing about Level 1 that Dr. Voss read out loud but did not bother to explain. The ranking system measures output, how much power you are currently pushing through your ability at the exact moment of testing. That is the only thing the number means. It does not measure capacity. It does not measure what is sitting underneath the surface. Waiting, sleeping, not yet awake enough to register on any existing machine. I had read this once, buried in a paper that maybe 12 people had ever finished. Evolutionary mimicry, at its theoretical maximum, was not just transformation. It was absorption, adaptation, the ability to not just copy an animal's form, but to genuinely evolve, to keep something from each transformation and build on it, to become something the original animal never was. No one had ever reached that theoretical ceiling, because no one with this ability had ever been ranked above level 4. They all gave up. All of them got assigned to low-tier schools and mid-tier lives, quietly shelved by a system that had decided their ceiling before they'd pushed against it. I crawled home at 3 a.m. with dirt on my knees and a secret burning so hot in my chest I could barely breathe. Fine. Let them file me away. Let them write the report. The next morning there was a letter with a government seal on the table. Greystone Academy, the lowest-ranked hunter training institution in the country. Of course, Level 1s don't get choices. Level 1s get handed a destination and told to be grateful it isn't nothing. I already knew that. I just hadn't expected it to sting this much. Greystone was where the system sent the ones it had quietly decided weren't worth a serious investment. The stragglers, the statistical noise, the write-offs. I packed my bag. My mom hugged me for a long time without saying anything, which was somehow the hardest thing of the entire morning. Worse than the letter. My dad said work hard. My brother gave me the look. The one that meant he believed in me even while the world was doing a very thorough job of demonstrating that it did not. I got on the transit and watched the city fall away. The buildings shrank. The skyline I had grown up inside of reduced itself to a postcard, then disappeared. Greystone Academy looked precisely as grim as I had imagined. Gray stone walls. The name was doing a lot of heavy lifting. Gray uniforms. Gray expressions on half the students. The entrance hall had a ranking board. Current standings updated weekly. Every name had a level beside it. The highest I could see was a level 6. And then there was me. Kai Ren. Level 1. Evolutionary mimicry. Fresh on the board, official and permanent. A guy next to me read it, glanced at me once, then walked away without any expression. Not contempt, not sympathy, just nothing. I was already ambient to furniture in a room that hadn't decided to notice me yet. Cool. Great start. Really loving this so far. Orientation was run by Professor Shen, who had the energy of a man in his 19th year of planning to retire. He explained the rules in a voice drained of all feeling. Weekly combat assessments. Monthly ranking evaluations. Bottom 10% gets their scholarship reviewed. He said it the way someone recites a train schedule they hate. Then he said something that made every student in that room actually sit up. Every year, the top 3 graduates of Greystone get observed by the National Hunter Corps. 1 guaranteed placement at an elite academy, 1 with a private guild, and just one, direct government recruitment. The room went genuinely, unusually quiet. Direct government recruitment meant resources, real training, access to research zones and ability materials that ordinary hunters spent full careers never touching. It also meant I would be exactly where I needed to be. I raised my hand. Shen looked at me with the exhausted calm of a man who had already seen this movie before. Is there a level requirement for the top 3? The whole room turned to look at me, some with curiosity, a few with what was already becoming a recurring theme, amusement. No, Shen said slowly, after a pause that lasted just a moment longer than it needed to. Performance-based only. Good. That was the only answer I actually needed. My first combat assessment came 3 days later. Each student tested individually against a training construct calibrated to their registered level. Mine was a level 1 wolf of pale blue light. Everyone was watching. I was the new kid, the mysterious level 1 with enough misplaced confidence to ask pointed questions at orientation on day 1. The construct lunged. I didn't dodge. I let it grab my arm, which made about half the watching students react audibly. And then I focused, reached for the warmth. For 2 seconds, my arm shifted completely. Scales, dense muscle. The crushing grip strength of a constrictor closing around something it intends to keep. Then I grabbed back, found the simulation core, crushed it. The construct dissolved into scattered light. Maybe 4 seconds total. Then my arm snapped back, and I had to step sideways to not fall. The room was completely silent. Then someone near the left wall said quietly, "That was a level 1?" And the silence, after that question, was an entirely different kind. Professor Shen was staring at his tablet with an expression caught somewhere between genuine academic interest and the caution of a man who doesn't want to get his hopes up. He noted something, said nothing to me directly, but that night I checked the board. My performance score had moved, not my level, still a very official, very stubborn one, but the score was a separate metric. And it had moved, just a little, just enough. It was a start, and I had learned a long time ago to respect what starts were capable of. What I didn't know was that someone else had been watching. Dr. Voss had a live monitoring feed running from every registered academy in the country as part of her research. Something about my assessment had flagged her system. An anomaly. A data point that refused to fit neatly into any existing model she had built. She watched the footage twice. Then a third time, frame by frame. Then she picked up her phone and called someone whose name never appeared in any official government directory that I would ever have access to. Run a full deep scan on Greystone's new level 1, she said. Evolutionary mimicry, animal subtype, full biometric history, family awakening records, raw machine output from ceremony, and don't log any of it in the shared database. The person on the other end asked why. She watched the footage a 4th time, watched my arm shift, watched the construct dissolve. Because, she said, in the very quiet voice of someone running math and not liking where it ends, if I am right about what this is, I cannot let anyone else find it before me. She hung up, and I, completely unaware any of this was happening, was in my dorm doing push-ups and practicing growing claws into my mattress at 11 o'clock at night. The gap between what she knew and what I merely suspected was the most dangerous distance in the world right now. And I had just taken the very first step toward closing it. The next morning I woke up before the alarm, which had literally never happened to me in my entire life. Something had shifted overnight. I could feel it sitting right there in my chest. I did 2 hours of practice before breakfast. Alone in the maintenance corridor behind the dorms, where the security cameras had a blind spot I had already mapped on day 1. Small shifts only, a finger at a time, treating my own body like a forge. Heat it slowly, don't crack it, build up the tolerance before you push the actual limit. By the end of the first week at Greystone, I had managed to hold a partial shift for 11 seconds. My record from the forest that first night had been maybe 2. Progress. Nobody noticed. That was the part I had planned for. At Greystone, a level 1 was furniture. People looked past me the way you look past a chair that's always been in the corner. I used that. I watched everyone else instead, studied their abilities, their habits, the specific way each person moved when they thought no one was paying attention to them. There was a girl named Mara, 3 dorms down, who had phase shifting. She could move through solid matter for short bursts. She practiced at 5 a.m. when the halls were empty. There was a guy named Dex, who had bone reinforcement and spent every lunch break cracking his knuckles into impossible positions to test the limits. Remarkably cheerful about it. And then there was Ren, a second year with sound manipulation, who everyone at Greystone agreed was the most likely person to actually make it somewhere worth going. Ren had the top spot on the ranking board. Level 5, clean and consistent. She trained with a focus that made you feel tired just watching from a distance. She noticed me watching her once. I expected something sharp about the level 1 staring. Instead, she just nodded, acknowledging the existence of a person, nothing more. That small nod sat with me for the rest of the day in a way I didn't fully understand yet. Sometimes the smallest acknowledgement lands harder than you expect it to. The second combat assessment came at the end of week 2. Professor Shen ran it himself this time, which apparently wasn't standard. He had started showing up to things more. I was called third. My construct was level 1 again. Same pale wolf, same basic parameters. The room had already decided this would be completely unremarkable. Good. I had spent 2 weeks practicing for exactly this moment. Not the construct, the audience. Specifically the part where I needed them to see something without seeing everything. The construct lunged left. I stepped right, let it pass, then dropped into a crouch and shifted both hands. Not claws this time. Something wider. Something with more surface area. The spread fingers of a hunting spider. Enhanced grip range. Pressure sensitivity across every fingertip. The ability to feel vibrations through the floor before they reached me. I caught the construct mid-turn by its simulation core. Squeezed once, and it dissolved. 6 seconds total. Cleaner than last time. I stood up and shook my hands back to normal. The room was quiet again. But a different kind of quiet. Last time it was surprise. This time it was the quiet of people doing math they hadn't expected to need to do. Professor Shen wrote something much longer on his tablet this time. Still didn't say anything directly to me, but he looked at me once, and that look had genuine weight to it. Ren caught up to me in the corridor afterward. She walked beside me for a few steps before saying anything. When she did, she kept her voice low, like she was being careful. She said, "You're not a level 1. I said, "The machine said otherwise." She said, "The machine measures output. It doesn't measure what you're holding back." Then she kept walking. I stopped. She didn't. Then over her shoulder she said, "Whatever you're doing, be careful who sees it." And then she turned a corner and was gone. Just like that. I stood in that corridor for a long moment. She was right. And the fact that a second year at Greystone had already figured it out in 2 weeks was a serious problem. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and thought carefully about what I actually knew versus what I was assuming based on one paper from 40 years ago. Evolutionary mimicry was classified under support tier abilities, which was part of why it ranked so low. Support abilities weren't built for direct combat output, or so they said. But the paper I had read, written by a researcher named Dr. June, who had studied one documented case of this ability, described something that didn't fit that classification at all. The subject in his study had started at level 1. Over 18 months, the subject developed the ability to retain physical traits between transformations. Not temporarily, permanently. A layer of scales under ordinary skin. Enhanced lung capacity that never returned to baseline after one whaleform attempt. The study had been marked inconclusive and quietly shelved. Dr. June retired the following year. The subject's identity was redacted in every copy of the paper I could find. But the mechanism he described was clear if you read between the lines. This ability didn't have a ceiling, it had a starting point. Everything else was iteration. Every animal absorbed, every transformation completed, left something behind permanently. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Then I did something I had been putting off. I shifted just my eyes. Eagle vision. Nothing else, just the eyes. The ability to see detail at distances that should have been impossible for human focal length. I looked at the ceiling and suddenly I could count individual fibers in the material. It held for 20 seconds, snapped back. But when it snapped back, something stayed. Almost imperceptible. But my baseline vision was marginally, measurably sharper than before. I sat up slowly, hands shaking slightly the way they did after a sustained shift. But my mind was absolutely, completely dangerously clear about what had just happened. It was working. Exactly like the paper said. Every transformation left a residue. I was not just copying animals. I was absorbing them. I was becoming something they never were. The implications took about 4 seconds to fully land. And when they landed, I understood exactly why Dr. Voss had made a phone call she didn't want logged anywhere official. If this worked the way I now believed it worked, if every absorbed animal left a permanent trace, then there was no theoretical upper limit to what I was capable of becoming. Not level 4, not level 6, Not any number on the existing scale, because the scale was built for abilities with ceilings. Mine was built like a staircase with no top step in sight. I needed to be much more careful, and I needed to move much faster. Those two requirements were going to be in direct and constant conflict with each other for a very long time. The following Monday, the whole school was called to the main hall. Director Hale, Greystone's headmaster, who rarely appeared in person, stood at the podium looking serious. He explained that the National Hunter Corps had reached out regarding a joint evaluation initiative. Select students would be assessed for early placement consideration. 6 weeks away. The evaluation would involve real field conditions, not constructs. An actual restricted zone, actual evolved animals, actual consequences if things went wrong out there. The room reacted the way rooms react when real stakes get introduced into a previously theoretical conversation. A lot of very quick, very private mental calculations happening. I was doing my own calculation. 6 weeks wasn't much time. But a field evaluation in a restricted zone meant direct contact with evolved animals. Real ones, not simulations. Real evolved creatures with real abilities I had never encountered. Real transformations to attempt. Real residue to absorb if I could manage the shifts under pressure. 6 weeks to build a foundation strong enough that the evaluation didn't just show what I was doing, but hinted at what I was capable of becoming. I needed every single day. After the assembly, Dex fell into step beside me in the crowd. He had never spoken to me beyond basic hallway acknowledgement before. He walked in silence for a bit first. Then he said, "You know the eval is basically impossible for level 1, right? Not cruel about it, just factual. The way someone mentions rain while you're already outside." I said, "Probably." He nodded. Then he said, "I've been watching your assessments. You do something with your hands before you shift. Like you're listening for something. What is it?" I looked at him. He wasn't hostile, genuinely curious, with the specific curiosity of someone who paid close attention to things other people had already decided to overlook. I told him I was feeling for the animal's natural frequency. Every species has a biological rhythm, a specific energy pattern running through its physiology, attuned to that first. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he said, "That's not in any ability manual I've ever read." I said, "No, it isn't." He nodded slowly and walked off in a different direction. That evening I got a message on the Academy's internal system. No name, just a location, a secondary training room in the East Wing that was officially listed as out of use. I went. The room had mats on the floor and one overhead light. Ren was there. Dex too. And a third person I recognized from the ranking board, a quiet girl named Sue. Sue had terrain reading, the ability to sense the structural and biological composition of any environment she physically touched. Level 3. Quietly, methodically, extraordinary. Nobody explained why we were there. Ren just looked at me and said, "We've all been writing off the evaluation. I think that's wrong, and I think you're the reason it might not be." I said nothing. Dex cracked a knuckle. Sue had one hand flat on the floor, reading the room the way most people read a page. Then she looked up and said, "He's already shifting." She was right. I had been running a low-level sensory shift since I walked in. Enhanced smell, reading the room before I committed to being in it. Old habit, almost automatic now. Ren said, "I'm not asking what you are. I'm saying we have 6 weeks and 4 different ability types in one room that nobody official knows about. That's a combination worth using." I looked at the 3 of them, sound manipulator, bone reinforcer, terrain reader, in a room they had prepared before I even knew I was coming. This was already more organized than me. Whatever this was, it was more than anything I had done alone in the dark, and I was genuinely, thoroughly tired of doing everything alone in the dark. So I said yes. The next 6 weeks were the most exhausting and the most alive I had ever felt at the same time. We trained every evening in that East Wing room. No record, no supervisors. Ren taught me to layer, to hold 2 partial shifts simultaneously without the signals interfering, like humming 2 different notes at once. Impossible at first, then possible. Dex helped me understand impact, how force moved through a body differently depending on the animal's physiology, how weight distribution changed everything about how I needed to move. Sue would press her hand to my arm mid-shift and describe what she felt in real time. Density changes, pressure points holding wrong, structural shifts happening faster than I knew. Having someone who could literally read my biology during a transformation cut weeks off, what would have been pure blind trial and error. I could not have planned for her specifically. By week 3, I could hold 3 partial shifts simultaneously. Eagle eyes, spider sensitivity in my fingertips. And something new. Partial hunting cat musculature in my legs. The cat had been the hardest. I kept fighting the shift instead of moving with it. Ren watched me fail 4 times and said one thing: "Stop correcting. Stop trying to stay yourself. Let it happen. You come back. You always come back. But while you're in it, You have to be willing to not be you for a moment. That was the whole lesson. Just that. That advice did more for my training than any paper I'd ever read. I stopped fighting the transformation and started listening to it. The shifts became faster, cleaner, more stable. By week 5, something unexpected happened. A shift left a residue I hadn't planned for. I'd been attempting partial wolf, enhanced hearing, heightened scent tracking. When I came back, my hearing didn't fully reset. It stayed sharper, not overwhelming, just enough that I could hear a conversation 2 rooms away if the building was quiet enough, I told the others. Sue pressed her hand to the side of my head and went completely still. And then she said, "Your inner ear structure has changed, slightly, but it's not shifting back." The 4 of us looked at each other. Dex said, "So it's actually permanent. Not a theory, not a 40-year-old paper. Happening right now in this room to a person we can see." Ren said nothing for a long moment. Then, "How many animals have you absorbed so far?" I counted. Eagle, spider, cat, wolf, traces from the constructs, 6 total, varying depth. She nodded. Then, by the evaluation, how many could you have? I thought about it seriously. If I pushed the training and the weeks held and nothing went wrong, maybe 10, maybe more. The room went quiet with that specific silence of people's understanding something for the first time that permanently changes the shape of everything they thought they knew. Dex looked at the ceiling. Sue looked at her hand. Ren looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Part calculation, part something else I didn't have a word for yet. Then my phone vibrated on the mat beside me. A message from an unknown number. No name. No identifying information at all. Just 7 words staring up at me from the screen. "I know what you are doing, Kai." I showed it to the others without saying anything. The room got very quiet again, but this time the wrong kind of quiet entirely. Someone outside this room already knew. And the question of who that someone was and what they planned to do with that knowledge was about to become the most important question of my life. Drop a comment with the animal you'd absorb first, if you had Kai's ability. Part 2 is coming and things are about to get a lot more complicated than a mysterious text message. I stared at that message for a long time. 7 words. No punctuation at the end, which somehow made it worse. A period would have felt finished. This felt like a door left open. Ren took the phone from my hand and read it twice. Then she set it face down on the mat, which told me everything about how she felt without her having to say a single word. Dex said, "Could be someone from the assessments, someone who noticed the same thing Ren noticed." I said, "Ren noticed in 2 weeks. This message came after 6 days of training." Sue still had her hand on the floor. She said quietly, "Whoever sent it has been watching longer than 2 weeks. The phrasing is too certain, too confident. This isn't a guess." That landed in the room like something heavy dropped from a height. We all felt the impact differently. Dex cracked a knuckle. Ren picked the phone back up and looked at the number. Unknown. Obviously, no carrier signature, no regional code, nothing that could be traced through the Academy's internal system by anyone without serious technical access. I asked, "Does everyone want to stop?" It was a real question. What we were doing was already technically outside the sanctioned training parameters. This made it something else. Sue lifted her hand off the floor and looked at me directly for the first time since I'd walked in. She said, "I want to know what you become. That's my answer. I'm not stopping." Dex shrugged with the particular ease of someone who had already decided before I'd even asked. Ren said nothing. She just handed me my phone back and picked up her training notes. Good enough. We weren't stopping. But we were going to be smarter about it starting immediately. I deleted the message, cleared the notification, and put the phone away. That night I lay awake, running through every person who could possibly know. Not many options. The assessments were semi-public, but the specifics of my shifts weren't visible enough. Unless someone had access to equipment that could detect what was happening biologically during a transformation. Equipment that wasn't standard issue for a school like Greystone. Dr. Voss had that equipment. She had built half of it herself. And she had already flagged my file, already made a call she didn't want on record. The math wasn't complicated, but sending a message directly to me, that wasn't how a government researcher operated. That was personal. That was someone choosing contact over surveillance. Different kind of move. I filed it away under things I couldn't resolve tonight and forced myself to sleep. Tomorrow we had 4 weeks left before the evaluation, and I had a wolf residue to finish absorbing. The wolf was taking longer than the others. Eagle had been quick. Visual processing adapted fast, because the human eye already had the architecture, just needed the upgrade. Spider had been strange but manageable. Cat had been the emotional one, the one where I had to learn to stop correcting myself mid-shift. Wolf was something different entirely. Wolf wasn't one ability, it was a system. Pack communication through scent and sound and micro-movement. Directional hearing so precise it functioned almost like a second set of eyes. And underneath all of that, something I hadn't expected. A threat assessment mechanism that ran constantly in the background, reading every person in the room before I consciously decided to. I had noticed it first in the dining hall. I walked in, and before I had even looked around deliberately, I already knew exactly which tables had tension and which ones didn't. It wasn't paranoia, it was data. Clean, organized, fast data about social dynamics and threat potential processed through a part of my brain that was slowly, permanently rewiring. Sue had confirmed it during one of our sessions. She pressed her hand to my temple and went very still for almost a full minute. Then she said, "Your amygdala is restructuring." I asked if that was bad. She said, "It's not bad or good. It's just different. Your brain is making more room for something it didn't previously have a department to process." I thought about Dr. June's redacted subject, the one whose identity had been scrubbed from every copy of the paper. I wondered if their brain had restructured too. I wondered how far it went. 4 weeks out from the evaluation, Professor Shen called me to his office. He had never done this before. I walked in, expecting to be told something was wrong. It wasn't that. He sat across from me and studied his tablet for a moment, which I had come to understand was his way of deciding how honest to be. Then he set it face down and looked at me directly. He said, "I've submitted your name for the evaluation's advanced cohort." I said, "There's an advanced cohort?" He said, "There is now. They added it 3 days ago. Government request." He let that sit. I let it sit too. Government request meant someone above Director Hill's level had reached into Greystone's evaluation structure and added a category specifically. That category would be more dangerous, more demanding, fewer guardrails. The kind of conditions where a level 1 student who didn't actually have level 1 output would be very visible. I asked him why he submitted my name. He looked at me for a long moment with that expression I still couldn't fully decode. Then he said, "Because I think you can handle it." He said it like he was slightly annoyed at himself for thinking it, which meant he had been arguing with himself about it for a while before deciding. That made me trust it more. I said, "I'll need to know everything about the advanced cohort parameters as early as possible." He said, "I'll send you the file tonight." Then he picked up his tablet again, meeting over. I walked out of his office and went directly to find Ren. The advanced cohort changed everything about how we needed to use the remaining 4 weeks. We had to restructure. Ren listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "They're not testing you, they're containing you. There's a difference." I asked what she meant. She said, "A real advanced cohort takes months to arrange. 3 days means someone already had the parameters built. They were waiting for a reason to deploy them. The evaluation wasn't going to be a showcase. It was going to be a cage designed to find exactly where my abilities stopped working. They wanted to locate my ceiling before I did, which meant I needed to have already blown past any ceiling they might have designed for. I needed to be so far beyond their model that the cage they built didn't reach me. 3 weeks and 4 days. I pushed every session past what I had been doing. Sue started calling it overclock mode, which wasn't inaccurate. I was running at a constant slight edge. The wolf residue finished absorbing at the start of week 3. My threat assessment ran clean and fast now, fully integrated. No longer something I noticed consciously because it was just me. I started on something new, Mantis Shrimp. Specifically the visual system, the most complex color processing apparatus in the animal kingdom, capable of seeing 16 color channels. Humans see 3, eagles see 5. A mantis shrimp sees 16, including ultraviolet and infrared. If I could absorb even a fraction of that processing, I would see things no human could. The attempt nearly put me on the floor the first time. My visual cortex was not prepared for what 16 channels of simultaneous input actually felt like. It felt like standing inside a scream. I pulled back, tried again more slowly the next day, and the day after, and the day after that. Sue sat beside me through every attempt, hand on my arm, reading the changes in real time. On the 5th attempt, I held it for 3 seconds without losing my balance. The world in those 3 seconds was something I do not have the vocabulary to describe accurately. Color isn't even the right word for what a mantis shrimp sees. It's like trying to describe music to someone who has only ever experienced silence. The concepts don't transfer cleanly. When I came back down to standard human vision, everything looked gray by comparison. Flat, dimensionless, like someone had turned off most of the world while I wasn't paying attention. I sat with that feeling for a while. The grayness, the reduction. Then I decided I was going to absorb the mantis shrimp layer completely before the evaluation if I had to stay up all night. Dex found me in the training room at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday. I'd been there since 10 p.m. He sat down across from me without saying anything and watched me work for about 20 minutes. Then he said, "You know you're not going to break the system by being better than it, right?" I said, "I know." He said, "So I train like you're trying to break something." I thought about how to answer that honestly. I said, "Because I spent 17 years being told what my ceiling was by a machine that measured the wrong thing. I want to know what's actually up there." Dex looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "Fair." He got up, stretched his bones into a configuration that was uncomfortable to look at, and started his own training on the other side of the room. We worked in silence until 4 a.m. It was one of the better nights I had at Greystone, not because anything dramatic happened, just because someone decided to stay without being asked. 2 weeks before the evaluation, Director Hale made another announcement. The advanced cohort evaluation would be conducted at Restricted Zone 7, a coastal designation I recognized. Zone 7 was not a training zone. It was a containment zone, the kind of place where evolved animals had been studied and classified but not cleared. Real threat levels, real unknown variables. The students who weren't in the advanced cohort would evaluate at Zone 3, which was standard. Zone 7 was a different category of risk entirely, and everyone at Greystone knew it. Mara, from 3 dorms down, came to find me after the announcement. She had never spoken to me directly before. She stood in the corridor and said simply, "Be careful in 7. I've read the reports." I asked if she had access to the Zone 7 reports. She said, "My uncle works containment. He stopped sending me things after the last update. The fact that he stopped is the thing to notice." She walked away before I could ask anything else, but her uncle had stopped sending reports after the last update. That sentence stayed with me in a very specific and uncomfortable way. 1 week out. I had absorbed 7 animals fully. Eagle, spider, cat, wolf, mantis shrimp visual system, peregrine falcon, specifically the dive calculation, speed assessment, trajectory reading, and one more that I hadn't told the others about yet. A mimic octopus, the ability to observe another creature's behavior and reproduce it precisely enough to fool the creature's own kind. The octopus had been different from the others. It wasn't a physical ability, it was cognitive. A pattern matching and reproduction system so sophisticated it operated below conscious awareness. I hadn't fully absorbed it yet. It was still in process. But even partial integration had started changing how I read people. I noticed the gaps between what people said and what they actually meant. Small tells, micro expressions. The octopus was already working. Sue had noticed the change before I told her. She pressed her hand to my forearm one evening and went still for a long time. Then she said, "Something in your temporal lobe is doing something new." I told her about the octopus. She was quiet. Then she said, "Kai, do you know what happens to an octopus when it mimics something perfectly?" I said no. She said, "It stops knowing it's an octopus." That landed somewhere cold. She wasn't warning me away from the ability. She was making sure I understood what it required, what it cost, what I needed to hold on to while it was happening. I thought about that for the rest of the day, about the line between absorbing something and becoming it, about where Kai ended and the accumulated residue of 7 absorbed animals began. I didn't have a clean answer, but I decided the question itself was something I needed to keep asking, regularly, loudly, as a matter of survival rather than philosophy. 3 days before the evaluation, the anonymous message came again. Same number, same format. No punctuation at the end. This time it was longer. "You have 7 absorptions. Zone 7 has something your system has never processed before. Do not go in without preparing for sensory override. This is not a threat. This is a warning." I read it 4 times. Then I showed the others. Ren read it, and her expression did something complicated. She said, "They're not trying to stop you. They're trying to keep you from dying in there." That changed the shape of the sender in my head. Whoever this was, they knew about my absorption specifically, not just that I was training. The exact count, 7, they were watching closely, and they were worried about what was in Zone 7, not about what I would do to it, about what it might do to me. That was a specific kind of concern that implied a specific kind of knowledge. Sue said, "Sensory override. What in Zone 7 would cause sensory override for an ability like yours?" I thought about it. Then the mantis shrimp visual system made the connection for me, something that operated on frequencies outside human perception, something that used biological signals, sound, light, electromagnetic pulses, as weapons rather than communication tools, something that had specifically evolved to disorient, to overwhelm, to shut down the nervous system of anything that tried to process what it was putting out, a natural disruptor. I went to the restricted section of Greystone's library that night and found everything they had on Zone 7. Most of it was heavily redacted, but one line survived the redaction. Organism designation Z7 alpha. Classification sensory predator. Threat level unresolved. Note, 2 previous observation teams reported complete perceptual dissociation before extraction. Complete perceptual dissociation. Clinical language for what happened when your brain stopped being able to tell the difference between what was real and what the predator wanted you to see. An animal that hunted by rewriting your senses, by making you experience a reality it constructed specifically to disorient and paralyze. Against a normal human, that was probably enough. Against someone with 7 absorbed animal sensory systems all running simultaneously, I genuinely did not know what would happen. The anonymous messenger apparently did, and was worried. 2 days before the evaluation, I did the thing I had been avoiding. I attempted a full sensory shutdown drill. All enhanced systems off simultaneously. Back to baseline human. Nothing extra. It was harder than I expected. The absorbed layers had become so integrated that pulling them back felt like trying to unhear a sound that had already changed the shape of your ear. I managed it for 40 seconds. 40 seconds of being purely, completely, unremarkably human. It felt like going deaf in a room where music had been playing for weeks straight. But I could do it. If Z7 Alpha tried to overwhelm my enhanced sensory systems, I could pull them all back and go dark. Navigate on pure baseline human instinct until I found ground again. It wasn't a perfect plan. But it was a plan that existed, which was better than what I'd had 3 days ago. I wrote it down in the notebook I kept in shorthand no one else could read. The night before the evaluation, I couldn't sleep again. I lay in the dark and ran through everything I had. 7 absorptions, partial octopus integration, the sensory shutdown drill. I thought about my family, my dad's A-rank strength, my brother's wind, my mom's healing hands. I thought about how I had walked into a ceremony as the last one and come out level 1. I thought about Dr. Voss watching footage on a loop, about an anonymous sender who knew the exact count of my absorptions, about a predator in Zone 7 that rewrote reality. And I thought about what Ren had said during one of our early sessions, when I had asked her why she was helping me. She had said, because the system told me what I was at 14. She said, and it was right, technically, level 5. Sound manipulation. Accurate, clean, and completely insufficient for what I actually want to do with my life. I know what it feels like. She had never said that to me again. But it sat in the room between us every session after that. The shared understanding of people who had been measured and found to be more than the number. I got up at 4 a.m., did one final practice in the corridor, held 5 simultaneous partial shifts for 43 seconds. Eagle eyes, spider hands, cat legs, wolf threat assessment, mantis color. Then I let them all go at once. Stood in the dark corridor in my completely human body and breathed. Just breathed. Reminded myself what the baseline felt like, what I was coming back to. The evaluation transport left at 7 a.m. I was the first student at the loading bay. Dex arrived second, saw me standing there in the early light, and said nothing. Just stood beside me. Ren came third. Sue fourth. We didn't talk. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said over 6 weeks in a room with 1 overhead light and no official record. The transport filled up around us. 30 students total for Zone 3. 6 for the advanced cohort heading to Zone 7. I looked at the other 5 advanced cohort students carefully. 2 I recognized from the top of the ranking board. Both level 5 and above, both clearly capable. 1 I didn't know at all. One was Ren, which I hadn't expected, and which made me exhale. And the 6th was someone who had not been on any list I had seen. A young man about my age with no visible academy insignia, sitting very still at the back of the transport, watching everything. He met my eyes once, just once. Then he looked away at exactly the speed of someone who had been trained not to be caught looking. My wolf threat assessment immediately flagged him. Red. The transport moved. Zone 7 was 40 minutes out. I looked out the window at the city passing by and thought, whatever is in that zone, I've been training for 6 weeks straight. And whoever sent those messages, friend or enemy, ally or trap, had just told me something I didn't know about what was waiting. That was information. I was going to use every bit of it. The city fell away behind the glass. The restricted zone boundary markers appeared on the horizon, orange and black. The universal signal for here, the normal rules no longer apply. I pressed my hand flat against the cold window. Eagle eyes sharpened the distant markers into perfect clarity. The wolf assessment read the transport's energy, heightened, cautious, alert. 40 minutes. Then whatever was waiting in Zone 7 was going to find out exactly what a level 1 with 7 absorbed evolutions and no theoretical ceiling looked like when it was ready. I was ready. I had never been more ready for anything in my life. And I had absolutely no idea what was actually about to happen, which, honestly, was starting to feel familiar. Zone 7 didn't look like a restricted zone from the outside. That was the first thing that caught me off guard. I had expected fences, warning signs, the visual language of danger. Instead, there was a coastline, gray water, gray sky, a long flat beach stretching in both directions until the fog swallowed it. Beautiful in the way that unnerving things sometimes are. The transport stopped at a low concrete structure set back from the water. No signage. Just a door, 2 guards with unfamiliar equipment, and a woman in a black coat waiting. She introduced herself as Coordinator Lim. No rank, no agency affiliation, no explanation of who she worked for. Just Coordinator Lim, holding a tablet and looking at each of us in turn. Her eyes stopped on me for exactly 1 second longer than on the others. My wolf threat assessment noted it, filed it, said nothing. I kept my face neutral and looked back. She explained the parameters. 6 students, advanced cohort evaluation, zone extended 2 kilometers inland, 8 hours. Individual assessment, no teams, no teams. I had been counting on at least some proximity to Ren. That rule landed differently than expected. Not panic, just a recalculation of everything I had planned. Objectives were personal. Each student had a sealed envelope with individual mission parameters. Mine was handed over by a guard who made brief eye contact and immediately looked away. I didn't open it yet. I watched the others instead. 2 of the level 5 students read theirs and their expressions went carefully blank, which told me the parameters were serious. The unknown young man from the transport, the one my wolf threat assessment had flagged, read his, folded it precisely, pocketed it, and looked at the water. Ren caught my eye across the group. She gave me nothing readable, which meant she was being watched too, and she knew it, and she was telling me to act like we weren't connected. Smart. I looked away and opened my envelope. Single page, clean formatting. 3 sentences that I read 3 times to make sure I was understanding them correctly. Locate organism Z7 alpha. Establish proximity within 20 meters without triggering threat response. Document behavioral patterns for minimum 15 minutes. Return to extraction point. No engagement parameters. No instructions for what to do if Z7 alpha noticed me first. No mention of the perceptual dissociation 2 previous teams had experienced. Just go. Simple enough that it was obviously not simple at all. I folded the paper, pocketed it, and used the remaining 5 minutes to run through my absorptions systematically. 7 confirmed, 1 partial. All online. The Mantis Shrimp visual layer was my early warning system. If Z7 alpha operated on unusual frequencies, I would detect it before a human could. Wolf threat assessment running constantly. Spider pressure sensitivity active in feet and hands. Peregrine falcon trajectory calculation for spatial awareness. Cat musculature in my legs. The partial octopus integration I was less sure about. It had been changing how I processed social information, pattern recognition, behavioral reading. In a zone, that might matter, or it might destabilize me at exactly the wrong moment. The octopus had a cost, temporary identity confusion during deep pattern matching. I needed to watch for that carefully. Coordinator Lim said, "Go." The 6 of us split without ceremony. The other 5 moved in different directions with the confidence of people who had trained for this specific environment. I walked straight toward the water first. Not because my objective was there, but the coastal edge gave me a clear orientation point. I needed 30 seconds to just listen. With wolf hearing active, Zone 7 was loud in ways the human ear wouldn't catch. Wind through beach grass at frequencies below normal range. Something moving in the fog, offshore. Small creatures in the sand below my feet, their movement creating vibrations. My spider sensitivity read as background. Nothing threatening, nothing unusual, not yet. And then, far inland, maybe 800 meters, something that wasn't background. A silence. A specific, deliberate absence of sound where sound should have been. Predators did that. They didn't make noise. They made the noise around them stop. Every bird, every insect, every small mammal within a serious predator's radius went quiet. I had read about Z7 alpha, sensory predator, used biological signals as weapons. The silence inland wasn't Z7 alpha making noise, it was everything else deciding not to. I turned away from the water and walked inland, kept my pace even, nothing about my movement announcing intention or urgency. Just a person walking, nothing to see here. The fog came with me as I moved from the coast, thicker, inland, the kind of fog that felt less like weather and more like a choice the environment had made independently. At 400 meters in, the Mantis Shrimp layer caught something, a flicker at the edge of what my enhanced vision could process. Not color, not light, something between the two. A frequency I didn't have a name for, pulsing slowly, emanating from somewhere ahead and slightly left, maybe 300 meters further. Rhythmic, patient, like breathing. I stopped walking, crouched in the beach grass, and let every sensory system run at full capacity simultaneously. The world became very large and very detailed all at once. Eagle eyes pulled the fog apart at distance. Wolf hearing separated the silence into layers. What was quiet from distance and what was quiet from presence. Very different things. The spider sensitivity in my feet picked up a vibration pattern I hadn't felt before. Not footsteps, not movement. A standing wave in the ground, something generating a field. And the Mantis Shrimp layer showed me something I didn't have vocabulary for. A column of structured light extending vertically from the ground ahead. Not visible to human eyes, not even eagle eyes. Something my visual system could process only because the Mantis Shrimp had given me channels in the spectrum that didn't have names in any human language. Z7 Alpha was not moving, standing approximately 260 meters ahead in a clearing in the beach grass, generating something outward in every direction. Steady, constant. The anonymous message had said sensory override. This was what that meant. Z7 Alpha wasn't going to attack me. It was going to make my own senses attack me. Completely different problem. I thought about the sensory shutdown drill. 40 seconds of going completely dark, all systems off. Back to baseline human. Navigate on instinct. I could do that. I had practiced. But I needed to get within 20 meters first. And between me and 20 meters was the field Z7 Alpha was broadcasting. I had no idea at what radius it became truly unbearable. I decided to approach on spider sensitivity alone. Everything else, offline. If I couldn't see or hear, the field had less to work with. I was giving it fewer doors to open. Pulling back, the eagle eyes felt like closing a window in a bright room. Wolf hearing dimming out was stranger. The world went flat in a way that felt fundamentally wrong. Mantis shrimp last, the hardest. Those 16 channels had become something I relied on without consciously choosing to. Shutting them down felt like going partially blind. Then just spider. Ground vibrations and pressure sensitivity in my hands telling me where the grass was and what the terrain felt like. That was all I had. That was enough. I stood up, walked forward, counted my steps because that was the only navigation I had, kept my breathing even, reminded myself that anything I felt beyond the ground was the field. At 100 meters from my estimated position of Z7 Alpha, I felt the edge of something. Not pain, not fear. A suggestion. Like a thought that wasn't mine leaning against my mind. It said, "You are very small out here." Not in words, in the specific quality of the feeling itself. The field wasn't a weapon yet. It was an introduction. Z7 Alpha noticing me. I kept walking, 80 meters. The suggestion became a pressure. My hands told me the ground was still the ground, which was the anchor I needed. Everything else I held at arm's length, 70 meters. The pressure became a narrative. Not words, not images. Something between. A strong sense that the fog behind me was closer than it had been. That the path back was gone. I knew intellectually the path wasn't gone. I had counted my steps. I knew the direction. The field was telling me something different, and I was choosing to trust the step count. 60 meters. The narrative tried to become visual. A flicker at the absolute edge of my perception. Not from enhanced systems because they were offline, from my baseline human vision. Something at the periphery. Moving. Not moving. Difficult to tell because it shifted the moment I tried to look at it directly, which is exactly how the human visual system fails. I stopped walking. Took a breath. Let spider sensitivity run its check. Ground still ground, grass still grass. No actual movement in vibration range. Good, nothing physical there. The thing at the periphery wasn't real. Z7 Alpha had found a door I hadn't closed. Baseline human visual perception, the one system I hadn't reinforced. And it was using it. Interesting. Not comforting, but interesting. I knew what it was now, and labeling something accurately takes significant power away from it. That's not real. Filed. Moving on. I kept walking. 50 meters. The peripheral flicker reduced slightly. 40 meters. I stopped. This was already closer than required. I was supposed to reach 20. I was at 40. The field at 40 meters was doing things to my baseline vision that were hard to ignore. I made a decision. I brought back one system. Just one. Wolf threat assessment only. Not hearing, not smell. Specifically the component that distinguished real threat from manufactured threat. The world didn't change when it came back online, but my reading of it did. Real threat? Low. You are not in immediate physical danger. Perceived threat? High. The field is functioning as designed. Distinguish between these two things, and you remain functional. That was all I needed. I walked the remaining 20 meters, crouched in the grass, and looked at what I had come here to look at. It was not what I had pictured. I had pictured something monstrous, something with obvious visual indicators of the danger it represented, something that looked like what it did. Z7 Alpha was approximately the size and shape of a large deer, pale, almost translucent in the fog, eyes closed, completely still except for slow rhythmic expansion of its flanks. Around it, extending in every direction at roughly 100 meters, its field pulsed, slowly, steadily, like a heartbeat that belonged to the entire clearing rather than one creature. I watched it for 15 minutes. The mission said 15. I watched for 23 because something happened at the 6-minute mark that I needed to understand before I left. At 6 minutes, Z7 Alpha opened its eyes. Not dramatically, just opened them the way you open your eyes when you realize someone is in the room with you before deciding what to do. Its eyes were not eyes in any sense I had prior experience with. Flat and pale. They didn't point in my direction. They didn't need to. The field was its sensory system, not its gaze. It already knew exactly where I was. Had known since 100 meters out. The field wasn't just a weapon. It was a perception system. It saw through the disruption it caused, and it had chosen not to escalate. It had felt me approach, felt me stop at 40, felt me push to 20, and decided to do nothing more than what it was already doing. Patience. I understood something then. The previous teams that had experienced complete perceptual dissociation, they hadn't been attacked. They had been overwhelmed by their own reaction. Z7 Alpha hadn't tried to destroy them. It had simply existed at full capacity, and their nervous systems had done the rest. They had run from something that hadn't chased them. The field was like a very loud sound. The sound didn't intend to hurt you. It was just very loud. Whether you survived it depended entirely on what you were made of. I was made of 7 absorbed animals, partial octopus integration, 6 weeks of focused training, and a stubborn refusal to trust the number a machine had given me at 17. I stayed crouched in the grass for 23 minutes and took every note I could form internally. Pulse rate of the field, response to my proximity, pattern variations over time. At minute 19, something changed. The field shifted subtly. Pulse rate increased by maybe 15%, and the direction of maximum intensity rotated slightly toward me. Z7 Alpha was curious. That was the only word that fit. It had noticed something unusual about the thing in the grass 20 meters away, and it was paying closer attention to it. I did not move. I let it look. Wolf threat assessment said, real threat still low. So I sat in the grass and let a sensory predator examine me at close range, deliberately, calmly. At minute 21, Z7 Alpha took a 1 step toward me. Just one. Slow, careful, deliberate, closing the distance to approximately 17 meters. My instinct said back up. Wolf assessment said, real threat low, investigation, not aggression. Spider sensitivity said, ground is still the ground. I stayed. The 2 meters felt significant and also manageable. At 17 meters, Z7 Alpha stopped. Its field was stronger at this range. The peripheral flicker in my baseline vision was more insistent, more detailed, harder to correctly dismiss. But I had a label for it now, not real. And the Wolf assessment was still running, still saying the same thing. The difference between what the field showed and what was actually true. Z7 Alpha stood at 17 meters and we looked at each other for 90 seconds. Me in the fog, it standing perfectly still. Whatever it was looking for in me, it was looking carefully. Then it turned around. Slowly. Walked back to where it had been. Settled. Closed its eyes. The field pulse returned to its original rhythm. Whatever had changed had unchanged. I stayed 2 more minutes. Then I stood, turned around, and walked back toward the coast, counting every step exactly as I had counted them going in. Precise, deliberate. At 100 meters out, I turned all systems back on. The world expanded violently. Eagle eyes pulling fog into clarity, wolf hearing filling 100 sounds I hadn't had a moment ago. The mantis shrimp layer came back last, and when it did, Zone 7 became something I had no words for. Every living thing had a frequency signature. I could see them all at once. I stood there breathing for a moment. Then I started walking again. 17 minutes left before extraction. I had mission data. And I had something else that hadn't been part of the plan. Z7 Alpha's field had a structure, a pattern. I had felt it for 23 minutes at close range, and the octopus integration had been doing what it always did, observing, mapping. I had a partial blueprint of how Z7 Alpha's sensory disruption system worked. Not complete, not something I could use yet, but a blueprint, a starting point. Iteration begins somewhere. I made it back to extraction with 11 minutes to spare. Coordinator Lim looked at my biosensor data, and her expression did something small and controlled that she thought I didn't catch. She asked, "Did you complete the objective?" "Yes." "Did you experience perceptual disruption?" "Some." "Did you abort at any point?" "No." She wrote something much longer than the previous notes. The other advanced cohort students returned over the next 40 minutes. The 2 level 5s I recognized came back within 10 minutes of each other. Both looked noticeably strained. One had a nosebleed he was pressing cloth to. The other walked carefully, like she wasn't fully certain the ground under her feet was behaving the way ground was supposed to behave. The unknown young man from the transport came back at the 6-hour mark, 40 minutes early, moving with the same stillness he had arrived with. He didn't look at me. I noticed. Ren came back with 9 minutes to spare. She walked directly to me and said quietly, "Did you find it?" "Yes." She said, "Me too. Hers found me first." Then she said, "I went manual." I looked at her more carefully, intact, alert. But something different in the way she was holding her jaw, like she had clenched it hard for a long time and wasn't quite done. Sound manipulation doesn't work well when the thing you're fighting operates on frequencies you can't consciously produce. She said, manual-like it meant something genuinely bad. I asked if she was all right. She said, "I will be." She glanced at my biosensor band and said, "Your stress markers are lower than mine, and you were supposed to be at a disadvantage." I had no response that was safe to give in front of Coordinator Lim, who was standing 12 meters away and absolutely within wolf hearing range, so I said nothing. She understood. The sixth student never came back. At the 8-hour mark, Lim dispatched a retrieval team into the zone without any visible change in her expression. Not surprised, prepared. The transport back was quiet. I used 40 minutes to let the octopus integration sort through everything it had recorded about Z7 Alpha's field structure, building a rough map. By the time we reached Greystone, I had something that wasn't quite an ability and wasn't quite a plan. A seed. The kind of thing you know you'll need before you know how to use it. Coordinator Lim's report was filed that evening, 12 pages. Standard evaluation documents were 4. Someone had a great deal to say about what had happened in Zone 7. 3 days later, I got a third anonymous message. Same number, longer this time. I read it standing alone in the East Wing corridor at 7 a.m. before anyone else was awake. It said, Coordinator Lim is not from the Hunter Corps. The evaluation was not run by the government agency you were told it was. The entity that requested your placement is private. It said, the sixth student was not a student. He was a recovery operative. His objective was not evaluation. His objective was you. He did not complete it. He's being debriefed. It said, you have approximately 2 weeks before they try again with better preparation. Use the time. Then the message deleted itself, automatic, 6 seconds after I finished reading. I stood in the corridor and let the wolf assessment run. Real threat, elevated. This is not the field. This is actual. I pressed my back to the wall and thought very quickly. The evaluation had been a setup, not to test me, to acquire me. The sixth student had been sent to do something that my presence and my actions had apparently prevented. The anonymous sender had known in advance, had warned me, had tracked everything closely enough to know that the sixth student was a recovery operative and that he had failed. Whoever was sending these messages was not Dr. Voss. Voss operated inside the government system. She would have used the evaluation structure, not set up an outside operative. This was someone else, someone who knew about both Voss and the private entity, positioned between the two with enough visibility into both to warn me about the second. I needed to find out who they were before anyone tried again. 2 weeks, 7 absorptions, a partial blueprint, 3 allies, and a room with 1 overhead light and no official record. I went to find the others, told them everything. The message, the sixth student, the private entity. 2 weeks. All of it, level voice. No pausing, because there wasn't time to ease in. The 3 of them absorbed it, the way people absorb information they were already halfway expecting. Not shock, recalibration. The shape of what we were dealing with becoming clearer. Dex said, so the evaluation was never about Greystone. Ren said, it was about getting Kai into a zone where an operative could isolate him with minimal institutional interference. Sue said, hands still on the floor. There are 2 people in this building right now who weren't here yesterday. They arrived sometime in the last 4 hours. I don't know who they are. The room went quiet. 2 new people in the building arriving after evaluation results were filed. That was not a coincidence. That was a timeline moving faster than I had assumed. Dex cracked every knuckle on his right hand in sequence, then the left. I had learned this was what he did when he was deciding exactly how serious something actually was. Ren said, what do you need from us right now? Not what do we do? What do I need? She had already moved past panic and into something more useful. I appreciated that specifically. I said, I need to find out who is sending me those messages. If they know this much and they're warning me instead of selling the information, I need to understand why before I trust them. Sue said, one of the 2 people is in the corridor outside the East Wing training room right now. The room with no official record. Someone is already at our door. I looked at the others. Then Dex stood and said, I'll take the administrative wing. Ren said, I'll handle the corridor contact if you want. I said, no, I want to be the one who goes. I walked to the East Wing with everything running. Wolf assessment at full capacity. Spider sensitivity on the floors. Eagle eyes watching every reflection and shadow ahead of me. The corridor was quiet in the wrong way. No ambient building sounds. Someone had been here long enough for everything to settle into their presence. 1 person, standing still. I came around the corner. The person outside the door was not a government operative. Not someone who looked like a threat. A girl about my age, short dark hair, looking at her phone. She looked up when she heard me. I ran the octopus pattern recognition before consciously deciding to behavioral read, micro-expression, intent signal. Results came back fast. Nervous. Not dangerous nervous. Caught nervous. The specific nervous energy of someone who had waited a long time to do something and now wasn't sure they had made the right call. She said, I've been trying to figure out how to talk to you for 3 weeks. I said, you could have sent a message. She went very still. Then she said, I did. 3 of them. The world rearranged itself. Not dramatically, just the internal shift of information landing exactly in the gap it was shaped to fill. She was the anonymous sender. She looked about 17. A Greystone uniform, but no ability classification badge, which meant administrative track, or she had a reason to keep her classification private. Both possible. I said, "You knew about the 6th student before the evaluation?" She said, "Yes." I said, "You knew about the private entity?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Who are you?" She said, "My name is Chen." She said, "My ability is information echo. I can retrieve data recorded by any device within range of my position." Going back up to 72 hours. I hear what the machines heard. She had heard Dr. Voss's call the night of my first assessment. She had heard the private entity's briefing for the 6th student. She had been hearing everything since. Decided I needed to know. I looked at her for a long moment. The octopus red said, "No deception indicators. Fear is genuine. The nervous energy is not performed." She was telling the truth as she understood it. I said, "Why didn't you tell someone official?" She said, "The private entity has people inside the official system. I didn't know who to trust. You were the only one who already knew." She said it simply, like it was obvious. Like, of course, the level 1 from the lowest ranked academy was the logical person to bring this to. And the thing was, she wasn't wrong. I wasn't connected to any official system. No alliance with any guild, government department, or institutional structure. I was outside all of it, the one blind spot they hadn't accounted for. I said, "What does the private entity actually want?" She took a breath. Then she said, "They want to replicate your ability, not recruit you, not study you. Replicate it and close the original." Close the original. Clinical language for a very specific thing, the blueprint of what I was becoming, and then making sure the original version couldn't compare notes with their copy. I leaned against the wall, let it land fully. 7 absorptions. A partial predator blueprint. A private entity with operatives inside the official system. A girl who heard machines. And somewhere in a government office, Dr. Voss, running her own separate calculation. Not aligned with the entity. She wanted me for her own research, her own classification work. 2 separate forces. 2 separate agendas. Both converging on the same level 1 student from the lowest ranked academy in the country. I was getting very tired of being a destination. Between them, one 17-year-old with short dark hair who had decided to warn me instead of staying quiet and safe. That choice had cost her something. I didn't take it lightly. I said to Chen, "Can you hear what machines are recording right now?" She said, "Yes, if within range." I said, "Sue thinks someone is in the administrative wing. I need to know who." Chen closed her eyes for 8 seconds. Then she opened them and said, "A researcher, mid-level. She's pulling student files, specifically yours and the 3 students you train with. They were already building a file on Ren, Dex, and Sue, which meant isolating me wasn't the only goal. They needed the full picture. My allies were now targets. Timeline just shortened." I said to Chen, "Come with me." She said, "Where?" I said, "To meet the 3 people who have been helping me train." She hesitated exactly 1 second. Then she said, "Okay, let's go." We found Dex first. He looked at Chen the way someone looks when they're updating a significant number of prior assumptions very quickly. Then he said, "The corridor contact left 10 minutes ago. He went through the east exit. Wasn't a student. His shoes were wrong. Nobody at a school wears shoes that specific. Dex noticed shoes. I had not known that about him until that moment. Ren reported the same from the administrative wing. The researcher had packed up and left before she got there. Fast withdrawal, organized, not panicked, prepared in advance to move." Sue said, "Both positions have cleared. Building feels like yesterday." Then she kept her hand on the floor for a long time afterward, which meant she wasn't fully satisfied with that answer. 5 of us in the corridor outside the East Wing training room now. Chen stood slightly apart, still carrying the energy of someone who had made an irreversible choice minutes ago. Ren looked at her, then at me. I watched her run the same assessment I had run. Threat level, intention read, reliability estimate. She arrived at the same general place, probably. I said, "We have less time than I thought. The entity is building files on all of us. We need to decide what we're doing before they finish deciding what they're doing about us." Dex said, "Options?" Ren said, "Wait and be reactive, or move first." Sue said, "Moving first requires knowing where to move." "Chen, what have the machines told you about the entity's location?" Chen blinked, closed her eyes, 8 seconds. 12. Then she opened them and said, "I know where their local research base is. I've been listening to it for 2 weeks. I know the layout." The corridor was very quiet. The kind of quiet right before something stops being theoretical and becomes actual. I had felt it before, at the edge of Zone 7, 20 meters out. The same feeling, the moment before the field hit, where you could still count your steps back to somewhere safer and choose to be somewhere that didn't require everything you had. I thought about the machine and its number, about level 1, about what it had measured and what it had completely missed, about Z7 Alpha choosing curiosity over aggression at 17 meters. Then I said, "Tell me everything you know about the base. We're not waiting 2 weeks. We move in 3 days. And this time, I'm not going in to observe from 20 meters. Not anymore." Chen looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Okay." And that was the moment the plan stopped being a direction and became a destination. 5 people, 1 overhead light, 0 official backing, 3 days. Whatever they had built, whatever they thought they knew about what a level 1 with 7 absorptions and no theoretical ceiling looked like, they were about to be corrected. 3 days. That was what I had said. 3 days before we moved. And in those 3 days, I learned more about the private entity than I had learned about anything in my entire life. Chen spent those 72 hours with her eyes closed more often than open. Every machine in Greystone's range was feeding her information, and she was sorting through all of it constantly. She told us the entity's name on the first evening, Prometheus Collective. No public profile, no registered address, no official presence anywhere that a normal search could find. But their machines talked. Their operatives carried devices. Their research base communicated with servers, and servers left traces, and Chen heard every trace within range of wherever she stood. By the end of day 1, I knew the base layout. Single-story structure, 12 kilometers from Greystone, positioned inside what was officially registered as a private ecological research facility. 12 rooms, 4 researchers, 2 security personnel, 1 medical unit that Chen described as more laboratory than clinic, and 1 room she couldn't fully read because something was blocking her. A signal blocker. The kind that cost more than Greystone's entire annual equipment budget. Whatever was in that room, they had decided no one should hear it. That room was where I needed to go, obviously. Things that cost that much to hide were always the things worth finding. I had learned that from the paper about evolutionary mimicry nobody read. Day 2, Dex and Ren handled logistics. Dex mapped the approach route using the physical survey data Sue extracted by placing her hand on every floor of the building she could access. Ren worked on the sound landscape for 12 hours, building a precise map of the facility's acoustic signature. She could feel the frequency profile of any environment she had studied. Sue said the facility sat on limestone, dense, old, the kind of geological formation that carried vibration a long distance with very little degradation. She could read it from 2 kilometers out. That meant she could tell us if anyone moved inside the facility before we got close. Passive surveillance, no equipment required, no signal to detect, just her hand on the right surface. I spent day 2 on something different, something I had been putting off because I wasn't sure I was ready for it, and being not ready for things had stopped being a luxury I could afford. The Octopus Blueprint, the partial map I had built from Z7 Alpha's field structure. I had been carrying it around like a thing I planned to use eventually had arrived. Z7 Alpha generated its field by running biological signals through a structure in its nervous system that didn't have a human equivalent. The field was a byproduct of how it perceived the world. But the mechanism itself, the way it converted internal biological energy into an external frequency that interacted with other nervous systems, that mechanism had a logic I could follow. I couldn't replicate the field. I didn't have the physiology. But I could replicate the mechanism on a much smaller scale using what I already had, the absorbed sensory layers running simultaneously. If I pushed all 7 absorbed sensory systems to maximum output at the same time, instead of running them as separate parallel processes, and directed that output outward rather than inward, it wouldn't be Z7 Alpha's field. It would be something smaller, rougher, less controlled, but it might create enough external sensory interference to disorient someone in close proximity. Sue tested it on day 2 evening. She placed her hand on my arm while I attempted the output and described what she felt from the outside. She used the word pressure. Then she said, "Do it again." The second attempt, she pulled her hand back after 4 seconds and shook it out. She said, "That's uncomfortable." Then she said, "That's genuinely uncomfortable." Then she said, "That's useful." Ren tested it from 3 meters away. She said the frequency interference was subtle enough that she almost didn't catch it, which meant it was operating below the threshold of conscious detection. Below conscious detection meant it would affect someone before they realized it was happening. That was the entire point of Z7 Alpha's field, not overwhelming force. Quiet, early disruption. Dex tested it last. He stood 2 meters away, bone reinforcement fully active, and told me to push it as hard as I could. I did. He blinked 3 times in rapid succession and stepped back. He said, "I don't know what that was, but I did not like it." Then he said, "Good? Use it." And then he cracked every knuckle on both hands in sequence, which meant he thought we had a real chance. Day 3 morning, Chen gave us the final intelligence. The signal-blocked room contained an experimental system the Prometheus Collective called the Mirror Protocol. She had heard fragments. The machines at the edges of the block were still talking to the ones outside it, and the gaps in their conversation told us shape, even if she couldn't hear the center. Mirror Protocol was not a weapon. It was a copying mechanism, specifically designed to extract the functional architecture of an awakened ability and reproduce it in a synthetic medium. No one had ever successfully run it on an ability above level 3. The Prometheus Collective believed that with the right subject, a level 1 with no theoretical ceiling, they could. The extraction process was not harmful, according to the fragments Chen could piece together. The part after extraction was the part I had been warned about. Close the original, make it inert. There was a pharmacological component, something that interacted with the specific neurological pathways that evolutionary mimicry used. It would leave the subject functionally normal, just not absorbing, just not layering. A person with the memory of 7 absorptions and no ability to add to them ever again. Alive, completely contained, completely stopped, just not absorbing, just not layering. Just a person with the biological memory of 7 animal absorptions and no ability to add to them ever again. Alive, completely contained, completely stopped. I thought about that for a while on the morning of day 3, about what it would mean to be stopped, to have everything I had built in 6 weeks frozen at exactly this point forever. Then I thought about Z7 Alpha standing in the fog and taking one step toward me out of curiosity. And I thought, whatever I am becoming, I'm not finished. Not even close to finished. We left at 2 a.m. on day 3. 5 people moving through 12 kilometers of pre-dawn terrain with no official sanction, no institutional backing, and one plan that Chen kept calling ambitious. I had told her ambitious was a compliment. She had said, I know, I just want to make sure you know that it is also the correct word for something that could go very badly. I appreciated her precision. I had spent 6 weeks training with people who were honest about difficulty while still choosing to walk toward it. Chen fit that group with no adjustment required. Sue navigated from 3 kilometers out with her hand on a length of limestone she had taken from the Greystone grounds, close enough in composition to what lay under the facility to carry signal. She described the facility as we approached. 4 heat signatures inside, 2 researchers working late, 2 security personnel on rotation. The medical unit was active. At 1 kilometer out, Ren started working the frequency gap, the specific acoustic hole the facility's security system monitored. She had spent 2 days building this map for exactly this. Every security system had a frequency it monitored. Ren's ability was to find it, match it, and introduce a signal the system read as normal. Background noise that said, nothing here. Every security system had a frequency it monitored. Ren's ability was to find it, match it, and then introduce a signal that the system read as normal. Background noise that happened to say, nothing here. It took her 8 minutes. Then she said quietly, we have a window. The system will read us as ambient until something physically triggers a secondary sensor. We need to move clean. We moved clean. Dex took the perimeter. His bone reinforcement let him move with almost no sound, each footstep placed with the precision of someone who understood exactly how his body worked. Chen moved with me, close enough that her range covered the facility's internal machines as we approached. She was giving me real-time updates on positions, murmured in a voice just above silence. The 2 researchers are in the main lab, left wing. Security 1 is at the front entrance, not moving. Security 2 is in the corridor between the main lab and the signal-blocked room. Security 2 was the problem. The signal-blocked room was at the end of that corridor, and Security 2 was currently standing between us and it. Ren's frequency window covered the external sensors. It did not cover a person who opened a door and saw us with their own eyes. Different kind of sensor, the oldest kind. The kind no frequency manipulation could fully account for. I said to Dex, I need 3 minutes in that corridor alone. He looked at me, and I could see him calculating. Then he said, I can give you 2. You'll have to make 3 work in 2. He moved before I could respond. The way Dex moved when he had decided something was direct, efficient, and very quiet for a person made of reinforced bone. He disappeared around the corner. 20 seconds later, Chen said, Security 2 just moved. They went toward the front entrance. I don't know why. I said, I do. Let's go. The corridor was clean. 8 doors, all closed. The signal-blocked room at the far end had a keypad. Standard. The kind of standard that assumed the threat would come from outside, not from within. Chen put her hand on the wall beside the keypad, closed her eyes. 6 seconds. Then she said 4 numbers without opening her eyes, and I pressed them. The door opened. Of course it did, she told them. Before we got inside. Before we triggered the Mirror Protocol's unscheduled call. She had already called the Prometheus Collective and told them we were coming to the facility, and then she had come herself. Which meant she had not called them to stop us. She had called them to be here when we came out, to be present for whatever happened next. That was a specific choice. Voss stopped at 15 meters. The same distance I had stopped at with Z7 Alpha, which was either coincidence or she had read my biosensor data from the Zone 7 evaluation very carefully. She looked at me, then at the file under my arm, then back at my face. She said, I've been watching your footage since week 1. I said, I know. She said, then you know I could have moved sooner. She said, I didn't. I said, why not? She looked at the facility, then back at me. She said, because what you're doing needs to happen without interference, including interference from me. I said, you built the classification system that told the world my ability was worthless. She said, I built it to measure output. I knew it didn't measure capacity. I built it that way on purpose. The field went very quiet. Not the Z7 alpha kind of quiet, the kind that came when something important was being said and everything nearby decided to listen. She said, Subject 0 was my first research subject, 37 years ago. I classified their ability as low priority. Then I watched what happened over the next 3 years. She said, by year 3, Subject 0 had absorbed 16 animals and was operating at a capacity the system had no category for. I wrote the paper. I filed the report. The government shelved it. The Prometheus Collective did not shelf it. They acquired Subject 0 and have been running the Mirror Protocol experiments for 35 years. I've been trying to find a way to stop them since. I said, by creating another case, by letting me emerge as a new case of the same ability, low enough under the radar that they would pursue acquisition rather than immediate neutralization. She said, yes. I said, you used me as bait. She said, I used you as the thing that could actually solve this. There is a difference. Whether you accept that difference is up to you. I stood in the field with the Subject 0 file under my arm and 7 absorbed animals and a partial sensory blueprint, and 4 people behind me who had chosen to be here. Voss said, Subject 0 has been in the Prometheus Collective's primary facility for 35 years. I know where it is. I've known for 11 years. I have never had a way in. She looked at me directly. She said, I think you might be the way in. Not because of what you are now, because of what you will be in another 35 years if no one stops you from getting there. I thought about 47 absorptions. I thought about a classification system built to hide the thing it was classifying. I thought about 47 absorptions. I thought about the system that had given me a number and called it a ceiling. I thought about a door swinging open in a forest at midnight. I wasn't tired. I was 7 absorptions in and a partial predator blueprint and a sensory disruption field that made Dex step backward, and I was not even slightly tired, not even close. I said to Voss, where's the primary facility? She said, it will take preparation. I said, I have a team. She looked at the 4 people behind me for a long moment. Then she said, I see that. She said, you also have a significant tactical problem. The Prometheus Collective now knows you exist at full capacity. They will not send another operative with bad shoes. She said, Subject 0 has 47 absorptions and has been in their facility for 35 years. They have studied every single one. They know what this ability looks like at year 35. They know which animals were absorbed. They know what a person becomes at year 35. And they built countermeasures based on all of it. Those countermeasures have been waiting. She paused. Then she said, they built the countermeasures a long time ago. They have been waiting for a second case to test them on. Congratulations. You are the second case. You are the test. I absorbed that. Wolf Threat Assessment ran an update. Real threat. Very high. This is now a different category of situation than it was 48 hours ago. Update all prior plans accordingly. Then something happened that I did not expect, and that Voss clearly did not expect either. Chen stepped forward from behind me. She walked to a position beside me and then slightly past me. She had her eyes closed. She stood like that for almost 20 seconds. Then she opened them and said to Voss, the Prometheus Collective's primary facility is in the Coastal Range, Eastern Sector. She said, they moved Subject 0 3 days ago, after Kai's Zone 7 evaluation results were filed. They moved them because they were concerned about what the results indicated was coming. She said, they moved them to a location that the machines in this area have been referencing for the last 2 weeks, but never naming directly. I have the signal pattern. I can find it. Voss looked at Chen for a long moment. Then she looked at me. She said, who is she? I said, her name is Chen. Her ability is information echo. She hears what the machines heard. Voss was quiet for a moment. Then she said, that ability was classified level 2 during her assessment. I said, yes. She said, I see that. Then, the classification system has some persistent issues. Something that might have been the beginning of a smile crossed her face. Small, controlled. The expression of someone who had been working on a very long problem and had just seen a new angle. Sue put her hand flat on the ground and said, there are 3 vehicles approaching this position from the east. They will be here in approximately 7 minutes. We need to finish this conversation. Voss said, there's nothing left to finish. You have the file. You have Chen's signal pattern. You know where they moved Subject 0. The question is what you intend to do about it. I said, the same thing I've been doing since the first assessment. She said, which is? I said, finding out what's actually up there, on the staircase. Past every ceiling anyone ever told me I had. Voss nodded once. Precise. The nod of someone filing a decision into a category they had prepared in advance. Then she said, "I'll be in contact." She turned and walked back toward the aircraft. Her companion, who had not moved since Voss held up her hand, opened the aircraft door. Voss got in. The rotors spun up. In 90 seconds, the aircraft was gone. No running lights, no sound trail. 6 minutes. We moved into the tree line before the Prometheus collective vehicles arrived. Sue guided us through the terrain with her hand trailing along a route system she had read on the approach. The vehicles swept the field with lights and found nothing. Sat at the facility entrance for 20 minutes while we moved steadily in the opposite direction through terrain that Sue knew better. We made it back to Greystone as the sky started to go gray at the edges. The building was quiet. The ranking board in the entrance hall still had my name at the bottom. Level 1, Evolutionary Mimicry. I stood in front of it for a moment. Dex stood beside me. He looked at my name on the board and then at me and said, "You know that number is going to be a problem for about another week." I said, "Why only a week?" He said, "Because in a week we're going to the primary facility, and after that, I don't think they'll have a category for what you are." He said it like a fact, not a prediction. Ren came to stand on my other side. She looked at the board. Then she said, "I came to Greystone because the system told me level 5 was my ceiling, and I wanted to see if it was right." She said, "It wasn't." And then she walked away toward her dorm without any further comment, which was the most Ren thing she had ever done, and I appreciated it enormously. Sue pressed her hand to the floor of the entrance hall, read whatever the building had to tell her at 5 a.m. on a morning after the longest night of any of our lives. Then she nodded once and left. Chen stood beside me last. She looked at my name on the board. Then she said, "When I first heard Dr. Voss's call, I spent 4 days trying to decide whether to warn you." 4 days? I asked what made her decide. She said, "The machines around you kept registering something unusual in your biometrics during your assessments, like your body was doing more than your output showed." She said, "I've been listening to machines for 3 years. I've never heard a body argue with its own classification before." She said it like it was the most interesting thing she had encountered. I looked at my name on the board one more time. Then I walked away from it toward the dormitory corridor. Subject 0 had 47 absorptions. I had 7 and a partial predator blueprint. The gap between 7 and 47 was a staircase, long, specific, and completely without a top step. I had 3 days before we moved on the primary facility. I intended to use all of them. In my room, I set the Subject 0 file on the desk and opened it to the first page. The photograph at the top was 37 years old, slightly faded, taken at an assessment ceremony. The subject in the photograph was 17, standing in front of a machine that was about to tell them what they were, looking at the camera with an expression I recognized without any difficulty. Not the expression of someone who knew what was coming. The expression of someone who had decided that whatever came next, they were going to be standing on the right side of it. I closed the file, put my hand flat on the desk. Let all 7 sensory systems run simultaneously. Eagle eyes on the window, wolf assessment on the building, spider sensitivity on the desk surface, mantis shrimp color on the early light under the door, cat musculature ready in my legs, falcon calculation running on the space between buildings, octopus reading the patterns in everything. 7 layers. All of them running clean. All of them mine. All of them permanent and building, pointing in the same direction, up and forward, toward a number that didn't exist on any scale. I was level 1. I was 7 absorptions and a partial blueprint and a sensory disruption field that didn't have a name yet. I was 3 days from the most important thing I had ever done. And I was not even remotely finished. Not close. Not anywhere near the top of the staircase. I hadn't even found the staircase yet. Not really. I had just found the door that led to where it started. Subject 0 was waiting somewhere in a coastal range facility with 47 absorptions and 35 years of climbing and whatever they had become at the top of that much evolution. I wanted to meet Subject 0 more than I had wanted anything in 17 years of being told what I was and wasn't by machines that were measuring the wrong thing. More than anything. Whatever the Prometheus Collective had built to stop a second case of this ability, whatever countermeasures, whatever protocol, whatever they thought they knew about what I was capable of, they had built it based on what they had seen, what they had measured, what the data had told them. They had not built it based on what was actually up there past every ceiling they could see, because they hadn't been there. No one had been there except Subject 0 alone for 35 years. And now Subject 0 was about to have company. Level 1, 7 absorptions. Ready? If you want to see Kai walk into that facility and finally meet Subject 0, find out what 47 absorptions actually looks like up close, then you know exactly what to do next. Subscribe. Leave a comment. Tell me what animal you think Kai absorbs next. Because this story is just getting started and the staircase goes a lot higher than any of us currently know.